Hi, everyone. Welcome. And thank you so much for having me. I'm going to be talking a bit before Suna A and I start to chat about our recent Asana Anatomy of Work Index, which is a global report on behaviors and attitudes at work. In our 2021 Anatomy of Work Index, we surveyed over 13,000 knowledge workers around the world to unlock what's changed over the past year of remote work. So I'm going to be spending a few minutes sharing a deck with you with some really interesting insights and findings. Next slide, please. So in our previous Anatomy of Work reports, we analyzed how people spend time at work and the factors that shape those habits. And this study builds on those findings by investigating how work has changed in a world that's still grappling, as all of us know, with the effects of the global pandemic and the steps that must be taken for resilience moving forward. On our next slide, despite investing in more ways to stay connected remotely, knowledge workers around the world are still spending 60% of their time on work about work. So what is work about work? Well, work about work are the activities that take time away from meaningful work, including communicating about work, searching for information, switching between apps, managing shifting priorities, and following up on the status of work. This detracts from the time that teams get to spend on actual skilled work, things that they were hired to do, such as marketing analysis or coding or any of the work that they're experts on. Worldwide, time lost to work grows in correlation to the size of the business. So organizations with 50% or fewer employees spend about 56% of their time on this, while those with larger teams, so 5,000 plus, lose 63% of their time on work about work. On our next slide, one of the other interesting things is that people are context switching. We're switching between 10 or more apps 25 times a day to do our work. In the United States, employees are changing between 13 tools, an average of 30 times a day. And employees who switch between apps are more likely to struggle with effectively prioritizing their work. So the more apps that are in use, the more likely that work is duplicated. And employees are also less efficient, with the messages and actions and deadlines more likely to be missed. Next slide. So another unproductive use of our time comes from something that we all know well, unnecessary meetings. And over the past year, knowledge workers have experienced a 52% increase in unnecessary meetings. And our research found that a cause of so many meetings is a lack of clarity. So, more meetings, less time for skilled work. On our next slide, one of the things that these meetings haven't helped us with is to help us better avoid the duplication of work. In 2020, the average knowledge worker spent 236 hours duplicating efforts. That approximates to about a month of work. So that's a month of work lost that could have been used in skilled work. So on our next slide, what we see is that as a result of that inefficient use of time, knowledge workers are working later. Burnout is a known issue, but COVID-19 has really kind of escalated this. Over the past year, we've seen an 88% increase in time spent working late. And that's deeply concerning, not just for knowledge workers who are enduring really grueling hours, but for leaders who need to think about the long-term impact of this on their employees. So as we head on to the next slide, the results aren't surprising. 71% of knowledge workers worldwide are experiencing burnout, with the highest burnout rates seen in the US. And burnout has direct business impacts: lower morale, more mistakes being made, and a lack of engagement with work. On our next slide, one of the things that is really interesting as well is that self-reported levels of imposter syndrome are increasing. So This skyrocketed in 2020 with nearly 80% of new hires who have been started remotely feeling an overwhelming sense of doubt or insecurity in their skills and what they're bringing to the table. What's even more interesting is that over half of tenured employees, so employees who have been with organizations, are also experiencing imposter syndrome, which suggests that there's a lot more work to be done in ensuring that all employees really feel recognized and supported while they're working remotely. Let's switch over to our next slide. So despite working longer hours, and so many knowledge workers, really being on the edge of burnout, 1/4 of deadlines are being missed. So they're struggling to find time. So let's head over to the next slide and see what teams really need. Teams need clarity on processes. Individuals say that they could save 290 hours per year through improved processes. For example, clearly defined roles and responsibilities. And added to that, 69% of knowledge workers would feel better equipped to hit personal targets if there are clear processes to manage work in place. So how can we take what we've learned from the anatomy of work and apply it in the year ahead? Let's check out the next slide and see what that says. Well, there are 4 things. One is around saving time for work that matters. If you click through, you'll see that only 26% of knowledge workers' time is spent on the skilled job that they were hired to do. And you can minimize work about work by really creating clarity in your organization and across your team by building a central place for coordination. Secondly, meeting deadlines and keeping teams aligned to meet those deadlines. That 26% of deadlines that folks are missing, by visualizing work in a way that works best for them, teams, organizations, members of those teams can plan and hold each other accountable, and teams can more effectively meet deadlines. Thirdly, limiting distractions. All of those tools and apps that people are switching through 25 times a day, having tools that are integrated allow for greater focus and flow. And fourthly, increasing engagement by increasing visibility. Across Anatomy of Work respondents, 71% were experiencing burnout, and work management platforms can help to create the clarity that teams are looking for by avoiding meetings that are unnecessary or ensuring that efforts aren't being duplicated, as well as giving leaders the visibility they need to better manage workloads and better distribute work. So there are a lot of great findings in this report. I encourage you to read it. If you check out our next slide, this gives you the link to the full report and findings, asana.com/anatomy. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Sonja, for the overview. A lot of great insights and findings. Just to introduce myself, my name is Tsune Shirota, and I'm a partner at Ford Innovation Lab, a venture firm based in Palo Alto and Tokyo. We invest in technology companies globally, and we are proud investors in Asana since 2018. So it's great to be able to do this together with you, Sonja, today.
Same here. I'm so glad to be here with you, Tsune.
Yeah. So let me start the conversation by asking you, what stood out from all the findings that you shared with us today? Were you surprised by any of those findings or not surprised by some of those findings?
I think I was not surprised. I think it validated a lot of what we were hearing anecdotally or were experiencing. The 2 things that really stood out to me most were around that sense of imposter syndrome. The surprising part of it was really the fact that so many people, workers who were experienced workers in organizations, were also feeling that sense of imposter syndrome, doubting their skills and their abilities. And that growth had happened over the last year. And then seeing that imposter syndrome really being shown in new employees who are grappling with working remotely in a new organization and trying to figure out who they should know, what information they needed to know to do their work well. Burnout was another big one for me, because burnout, and really seeing the increase in burnout, something that I think we knew was happening, but seeing that increase. Also, there was a correlation between imposter syndrome and workers saying that one of the things that they wanted to work on was building confidence, and feeling that sense of being heard and recognized for their perspectives and the value that they were bringing. I think those things were things that absolutely stood out to me looking at the report.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, imposter syndrome and burnout, I think those are real concerns, and it totally makes sense if you're new to the organization and you don't have the network built out yet internally, and just came on board. You might feel and wonder if your work is actually making a difference and being appreciated, right? And I think that's especially the case for high growth companies, and you hire a lot of people, and other people are relatively new too in the organization. So I think that's very important question and aspect for managers and management for the high growth companies. So I'm curious about how has Asana approached that issue as a high growth company? Asana has hired a lot of people over the last year, right? And
we have.
How did you guys think about that?
One of the things that when we had to switch, when we switch, we really try to think about it in a really intentional way. We value culture, and we think about culture in the same way that we think about our product. How are we doing this in a really intentional way? Because we know that it absolutely contributes to our business success. So in terms of onboarding, we really tried, and the great thing is we also use Asana. So we try to ensure that question about work, and ensuring that new hires had that information that they needed to do their work well. That was something that was top of mind. We also wanted to make sure, so we used Asana to ensure that was happening. We also wanted to make sure that employees, particularly because we recognize that employees that might come from underrepresented groups might not be sure about the communities that existed. So we were really intentional in terms of ensuring that employees knew about the communities that existed and could find their communities so that they had support and spaces to raise issues or challenges. Another thing that we thought about and really focused on was setting norms. We know, for example, that with the shift to remote working, parents and caregivers had an extra burden to carry. So how are we ensuring that it was okay to ask for help, okay to create spaces, so that you could define when you needed to work, whether it was in terms of calendar blocks or just creating norms to say that this is okay to ask for, this is okay to share how your time was going to be spent. And this is what you were working on, so that people felt comfortable asking for that support, as well as modeling and showing how they would be using their time. We also ensured that people were using tools and processes. So for example, in Asana, we have do not disturb notifications so that people could spend time doing that focused work, that really tapped into their skills. One of the things that we also have at Asana is No Meeting Wednesdays, where we encourage people to spend that day focusing on work that allows them to be even more productive and focused. They can spend and block their time. We know that meetings might happen, but we encourage people to default to no meetings on that day, so you can have that block of really focused time to do work. So it was about not just our product, but also the culture and the things that we were doing that allowed people, we think, to really shift into the work so that they knew the information they needed to know. They had the tools that they needed to perform and to get up to speed really quickly, but they also had spaces if they needed help and support. So we tried to normalize all those things.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I love the fact that you guys use Asana for pretty much everything.
Everything.
And your kind of philosophy on how to run the company is actually reflected inside the product, which
Absolutely.
is really cool.
Absolutely. I
Yeah,
have a
and
question for you, actually.
sure.
We shared some of the global findings, but I'd love to hear from you, your take on how these insights map to what you're seeing, some of the trends you're seeing in Asia. One stat that really stood out was that the shift to remote work in Japan has doubled the time that employees are spending in terms of unnecessary meetings. So how does that kind of resonate with you as you're seeing different countries adapt to remote work?
Sure. Yeah. It does resonate with me. Initially I was thinking that if you or anyone in the audience know the commuting in Japan, you might have seen the packed train and people are kind of
Right.
commuting in a really packed train, and that's kind of tough, right? So I was initially thinking that people might be freed from it. That would be
Right.
good. But I think, as I think more, it kind of makes sense that people in Japan or maybe some other high context culture countries, people work longer hours for meetings.
Right.
And here's what I think what happened. The work shifted to remote, and as you mentioned, there's less context about work, right? There's limited opportunity to have informal check-ins, and it's hard to gauge how others are reacting to a subject, and
Right.
collecting the information. All of that is tough, and there's generally speaking less context. And Japan, where we have big operations in, is a good example of high context culture, meaning communication and word choice and information sharing in general are more indirect and implicit
Right.
than explicit. So I think what happened is, to supplement the lost context, right? Like, I think people tend to require more time to collect the information and understand the context
Right.
and clarify where the things are going.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think that's probably not unique to Japan, but Japan being one good example of the high context culture, I think it showed up in the survey results that you guys have done, which is pretty cool. Like, you did survey in many different countries, including Japan and other parts of the world. And I think one data point I got from that survey is 57% of the workers in Japan believe that clarity at work will help them reach their goals, which I think also implies, right, that people are in search of context and clarity as a result of this shift to the remote work.
Yeah.
Which I think is it's an interesting challenge that many countries and companies face in this world.
Yeah, I feel those three things, and you said them. It's that context, that clarity, that communication. It's definitely a theme that is seen throughout the entire report and across the world in terms of how knowledge workers are trying to do their jobs well.
Yeah, makes sense. I want to go back a little bit on the culture that you mentioned. One of the reasons why we love Asana as a company is because of its focus on culture. Right. As far as I know, Asana has one of the best employee satisfaction scores, and it's featured as the best place to work by many media outlets. And I think also you have great practices and traditions that were sort of designed to reinforce the culture. And one example that I know is the traveling narwhals in the office. It's such a great practice. It's basically a way to show appreciation to other employees inside the office by kind of passing the narwhals to other people that you want to show appreciation.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, so it's such a great way to reinforce the culture, but can you talk a little bit about how you transition that type of practices and ways to tie employees together from the office to online? Because I think that's one important aspect here too.
Absolutely. So we give traveling narwhals as a sort of recognition tool that employees can give to other employees, recognizing the work that they've done. And it's one of the sweet, informal ways of recognition that really kind of tug at your heartstrings and put a smile on your face and allow you to be recognized through the organization. And of course, you're remote, so you can't go leave a narwhal on someone's desk. and we use a variety of creatures, but we call the whole thing traveling narwhals. So how do we recognize that, and how do we kind of continue recognition? Because it ties back to employees not feeling as though they're recognized in terms of the work and the contributions that they're having. So in an online world, and this is something that applies even if you are working, if we were in a situation where we were in offices but were distributed across many locations, we've done this through what we call a love channel. And we use love through Asana to really say, hey, this great thing happened. So I want to recognize Jane Doe for the work that they've done to support the launch of this product. This is how Jane showed up. This is what her contribution was. This is the great work that she did, and this is the impact it had. It actually allows it to be seen across the entire organization in a really different way. And people, it works almost like anytime positive feedback, because it allows people to be recognized. Anyone can do it. So it ties into employee to employee recognition, whether it's leadership or someone who's an individual contributor. And it just ties back into how are we ensuring that we're recognizing the great efforts and impact that our employees are having. And I think this is something that companies can think about. It's an easy lift. It's writing about the impact that employees have and allowing it to be recognized by everyone. And simple yet meaningful ways like this are real ways that show the value that people are bringing, in addition to what you might be doing in terms of performance reviews or what other forms of recognition that you have. But doing things like this allow people to see in real time, this is the impact that their work has, and just allows them ultimately to continue to thrive and do their best work. And I think it's something that's so important. We forget how simple yet how meaningful these things are. And I encourage folks to think about doing this is an easy add-on to whatever other processes and tools that you have within your organization.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And, it requires conscious efforts to, keep it going, right?
Yes.
So I think that's one takeaway, I think, for many companies aspire to reinforce the culture, even under this challenging distributed environment.
Exactly. And I think it goes back to it being intentional. Not everything, particularly as organizations scale, not everything that might have worked when you were a 50-person company might work when you're an 800-person company or a 10,000-person company, certainly. But you look back at what's the sentiment that you're trying to create? Or how does this tie to your company's values and the culture that you're trying to create? And what's the tool that creates that same effort or response or impact? And really thinking about your culture in that way, again, when you're thinking about your culture almost as you would your product, you're always iterating, but you're always thinking or tying it back to the values of what you're trying to create. And that's something I think that applies to every organization.
Yeah, makes sense. I would like to talk a little bit about the progress we made. As Asana, I think, took a lot of efforts and initiatives to adjust to this remote work. But overall, we talked a little bit of a lot of the challenges that happen at the workplace. It's been a year, right? Almost. I mean, depending on the region, it might be more than a year. What's your observation as you talk to different organizations and your thoughts, what kind of progress we made, and especially your role as the head of diversity and inclusion at Asana? Be curious to know how, we think about the progress and the remaining work, especially in the environment.
Yeah. So when we first got into this new normal, we had no sense of how long it would be. We shifted really quickly. Many organizations shifted really quickly into this, and so it was really fast and intentional. But this is where we are. This is the scenario that we're existing in, and we've been existing in it for the long haul. Some companies, as we know, have decided that they are going to stay working remotely. Some companies are hybrid. Some companies are going back into the office. But in addition to all of that, a lot has happened, particularly in the United States, with the death of Mr. George Floyd, that really kind of led to this reckoning around racial equity and justice. So a lot has been happening in the world, and so employees are demanding and asking for action in and rightly so in a social context, because there's no division really between workplace and home life, right? And organizations, in my mind, really need to continue to be stepping up. They need to be flexible. They need to be agile. They need to really recognize that employees are going to demand more, whether it's in the diversity and inclusion space around the actions that they're taking and really being accountable, as well as the work that they're asking employees to do, and how flexible and agile that they can be. What are the processes that allow me to know the work that I need to do? How can I balance my workload? How can I balance the demands of my personal life with the work that I have to do? How are managers thinking about, and how do managers have at their fingertips tools that allow them to understand the workload of their teams? Who is doing what? What's the status of projects? Really being able to manage their teams effectively, as well as being able to manage their teams inclusively, creating space for employees as needed, who are managing multiple demands. So from our perspective, we're thinking about it in terms of not just the tools and processes, but how are we equipping our leaders to be inclusive leaders, to create a space which allows them to display that sort of awareness and commitment to the things that we hold true and dear to us, as well as allowing their team members to know that this is a place where they are heard and they are recognized. And I think that's something that companies are demanding. We saw that in the report, that sense of not being recognized, not being heard. Employees are asking for that. So I think, in the last year, and certainly in the years ahead, we're going to see that, and leaders need to recognize and be prepared for all of those things.
Got it. Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the situation changed, and I think similar to the cultural difference and reinforcing culture, I think it takes the leaders to recognize it first, and then empower those who are on it to tackle it.
Exactly. I'd like to switch and ask you that same question, but put in a bit of a spin on it. So we've heard, the digital transformations have kind of accelerated just by 5 years, which is amazing. So half a decade in just a few months. So from your perspective, how has work management changed our approach to the future of work? As an investor, where are you seeing this trend kind of going in 2021 and beyond?
Sure. Yeah. The first thing that I would say is, the acceleration is real, right?
Mm-hmm.
People need to work remotely, and that requires, just like it requires leaders to think about not only the systems and places and culture and the how to treat employees and so on and so forth, but tools and systems, it's very important. And I think work management software played a pretty important role for the last few years, and we remain very excited about the future outlook of the category. The market grew tremendously over the last few years, and to your point, there are just too much work, and as the business and the world moves fast, and the business needs to respond to the changing situations, which requires people at those companies to coordinate a lot. And sometimes that results in work about work. So people are in search of context, and people are constantly checking, okay, is it right? And am I doing the right things? And so the work management, I think, plays a really, really important role and helps a lot of organizations streamline their workflow and decision-making and alignment processes. So we're pretty excited about the category. And in general, like looking ahead 2021, I would mention three things as a key themes that we remain and feel very excited about. And those are one, automation, and two, alignment with the goals.
Yeah.
And finally, the third aspect is sort of brainstorming and creative decision-making processes. Yeah, so let me just briefly talk about each of those aspects. And so starting with automation, right? Again, there are more work to do than in the past. But much of that work can be actually automated by software and relatively simple kind of rule-based solutions. So for example, when I get an email and there is an attachment, which is, let's say, purchase order of some sort, and I need to save that attachment into a file folder system, Box or Dropbox or anything else. And then I need to let my team know through Slack or other means. It's pretty simple workflow, but it's work, right? Things like that, it's actually pretty easy to automate, and products like Zapier or Trade.io and others, help us connect applications and automate those workflows. Each step might be small, but to your point, like work about work, it can add up to a big amount. So, and also a little more complex enterprise environments, the product category called robotic process automation, RPA in short, has been growing very quickly, and large organizations automated many of these repetitive tasks. So, across applications, automation is definitely a thing, but not only those across application use cases, I think it's also important to have some automation element inside the single application too. So even for Asana, for example, I think Asana embraced automation a lot. There could be several repetitive tasks, and that can add up, right? So creating new projects and assigning people, or the deadline shifted a little bit, and then other deadline needs to shift. Those are kind of manual steps, but we're pretty excited about new features and improvement in the Asana products toward automation, for example. So I think automation definitely is a big theme.
Yeah.
And the second thing that I would mention is alignment, right? Again, so the priorities can shift because the world changes fast.
Yeah.
And at times people might be feeling that, wait, I'm working on this thing, and how is this related to the company goals? Right? Yeah. So I think that companies often have OKR, right? Objectives and key results, and make the company priorities visible and make each individual's objectives clear and all that. But I think this is going to be even more important simply because the speed of the change is just accelerating, and it is ultimately people and their focus, right? That ultimately delivers the value to the customers. So if those efforts and people are aligned with the overarching goals, I think the results would be better, and the customers would be happy. And I think Asana, by allowing people to work on individual tasks and make it visible toward OKR, I think it's very uniquely positioned to kind of capture that demands and needs. And pretty glad to see you guys invested in that side as well.
Yeah.
And lastly, what I would mention is brainstorming, right?
Yeah.
So tough to do under this environment in a remote manner.
Yeah.
So document apps like Google Doc and others are great, but it's kind of difficult to have like real brainstorming.
Yep, I've seen
it. Yeah. And those, document products are great, but those look kind of final output. So like it's kind of hard to mess up others' input.
Yeah.
Right. So I think our realization is that we would need a place where people can actually freely provide input and contribute and move things around within the product so that people can come to good decisions and discuss all the possibilities.
Yeah.
So that's one area that we feel super excited about. And we actually invested in a company called Mural. It's spelled MURAL, which offers
I know it.
digital workspace where all the
Yeah.
members can contribute their ideas.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, a lot going on, obviously, in the market, but we are very excited about all these changes, and I think a lot of the good changes will happen over the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I love those things that you said. That point around automation, you're right. It feels like just simple things that you're doing, but they're repetitive tasks. They can certainly be automated, and they do take time. And people are spending time doing it, right? And it goes back to that work about work piece, and then that point around that clarity. At Asana, we are really clear in terms of this is how your work, meaning with any company, we use our tool to be able to say, this is how the work that you're doing ties to your KRs, which tie to objectives, and just that sense of clarity, understanding how your work ladders up in a pyramid of clarity, it just allows you to be focused on the mission, gives you that sense of accountability and transparency, and really just allows you to understand how does your work fit into the bigger picture. And I think, it's something that we're definitely seeing people asking more for. And we know that our product allows that, but it's not something that is unique to our organization. This is something that people are asking for globally, to be able to do their work well.
Yeah. Great, makes sense. We are almost time, just last few minutes. I'd love to leave our audience with one last bit of wisdom from you. If you have thoughts on what leaders and organizations from different industries or geographies can do, and to kind of look for resilience, right? The year of recovery into 2021.
Absolutely. I think, once leaders recognize that workers want to be at organizations where they can thrive and do their best work, and they want to be recognized for the value that they're bringing to an organization, the resolutions that workers around the world consistently ranked as their top 3 resolutions for 2021 in the survey, where they want to advance in their careers, they want to be organized, and they want to build confidence. And those are all things that leaders and organizations can help with. Organizations need to create spaces that support not only their new hires, but also their tenured staff, their longtime staff. They need to be thinking about onboarding and how they're bringing on board new folks, and really creating. They need to focus on providing increased clarity and alignment, so that the real work can be done. The things that folks were hired to do, they can do. And effective work management, which allows for clarity, transparency, and accountability. Those are the things that will really allow people, as we settle in. We shifted last year, but this year we've settled into this as the way that we work. And having those tools that allow for that sense of clarity will allow for better communication and collaboration. So I think having those things top of mind, and looking at tools that allow for that integration with all the different things that people are being asked to do, will set both workers, and teams, as well as organizations, up for success.
Great, makes sense. Thank you, Sonja, for sharing all the insights. And I think it's time to wrap up. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for joining today. And if attendees, anyone would like to learn more about the survey findings, you can visit asana.com/anatomy, and hope to see you there in the Asana website.
Thank you so much, Tsune. This was such a great conversation. As Tsune said, asana.com/anatomy. You can also follow us on LinkedIn or on Twitter or any of your social media platforms. And we're continuing to hire folks across the world. So I just want to call out that we're also hiring as well. Thanks again.
Great. Thank you.